Hey Potomac, it's Miss Conley. It's Saturday, and I'm here to share with you chapters 8, or I'm sorry, not 8, 9 and 10 of Freedom Crossing. So I hope you're enjoying your listening to the Freedom Crossing and following along with us about Laura and Bert and Martin. And we're kind of getting to some good parts now, some suspenseful parts. So hope you're enjoying it, and hope that things are going well for you and that you're keeping busy. Tomorrow's going to be a really warm day, so get out, enjoy yourself, but keep safe and keep distant. So all right, so here we go with Freedom Crossing chapters 9 and 10. Okay, Potomac, here we go with chapters 8 and 9 of, 9 and 10 of the Freedom Crossing book. A present for Laura. A bell in the front hall jangled softly. Laura felt the now familiar ache of fear returning to her chest. Not again, she thought. At the first sound, Martin had slid into the secret room and was pulling at the rug. Bert said nothing. His mouth was set in a tight, straight line. He reached for the trap door, but Laura stopped him. She gathered up the dishes from which they had been eating and handed them to Martin, as if they were searchers at the back door. There must be no evidence of lunch for 3 in her bedroom. Bert nodded his approval, then set the trap door in place and unrolled the rug before he left to answer the bell. Laura pulled the rocking chair into the middle of the room and sat in it, tense and quiet, waiting for the thud of boots on the stairs. Instead, she heard Bert call with a hint of laughter in his voice, "Come down, Laura. Here's a young fellow with a present for you." Who would send her a present? Joel came to her mind at once. She ran eagerly down the stairs. A small boy whom she didn't recognize stood in the hallway, clutching the package wrapped in plain brown paper and tied firmly with string. As she descended the stairs, he came toward her, asking in a stiff, proper little voice, "Are you Miss Laura Eastman?" She crouched down to his side. "Yes, I am, and who are you?" "I'm Harvey, miss, and this is for you. The boy who sent this said to tell you he can't come see you tonight." Harvey thrust the package into her hands and would have left if she hadn't caught his arm. Laura was dismayed at the message. She was sure the boy had memorized it. Did this mean Joel wouldn't come after Martin tonight? "You'd better step into the kitchen and have a cookie before you go away," she said. He considered this solemnly. "Yes, all right." Bert followed them to the kitchen. "Who sent you, Harvey?" "I'm not to say." He accepted a cookie from Bert. "Thank you." Laura turned the package over in her hands. It must be from Joel. She remembered how he had brought her the kitten after their quarrel over the trapped rabbit. Was this a peace offering too? "Well, open it," said Bert. She wished she could be alone when she opened it. A present was a rare and exciting thing, and especially one from Joel. It felt like a book of poems perhaps, a novel by Charles Dickens. Bert and Harvey were watching her expectantly. She broke the string and removed the paper. It was a book. She turned it over and read the title, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Laura felt as she had been slapped. This was no apology. This was an insult. That abolitionist book Joel had said she should read. You couldn't believe those abolitionists. Her aunt and uncle had talked about them. Abolitionists were so set on getting rid of slavery, they'd say anything. Almost in tears, she flung the book onto the table, where it landed with a thud. The little boy jumped and looked dumbfounded. Bert picked up the book. "I've read this," he said. "It's good." Harvey licked some crumbs from his hand. "There's a note in this book," he informed Bert. "There." He pulled at the corner of the white paper that protruded from between the pages. Bert pulled out the note and looked inquiringly at Laura. "Go ahead, read it," she said. Ordinarily, she wouldn't have let Bert read a note that was intended for her, but she was so furious at Joel she didn't care what he had written. Bert folded the paper and studied it silently before handing it to his sister. "What do you make of this?" A short note that had no greeting and no signature. It was only 4 lines long. "Though some may fail, those who try on and on will succeed. Sometimes folly leads to freedom, and the rabbit escapes from the trap." While Laura was reading, Harvey started through the pantry, heading for the front door. Bert strode after him and seized him by both shoulders. "Wait a minute. Who sent the book?" Harvey said as before, "I'm not to say." It's all right to tell us. Whoever sent it would like us to know, Bert urged. No. Harvey tried to break free. I'm not to say. Let him go, Laura said. I know who sent it. Who but Joel would send her Uncle Tom's Cabin, and who else would mention a rabbit in a trap? She fished another cookie from the tin and gave it to Harvey. You're a good boy to do as you were told. Go straight home now. Happy again, Harvey went out of the kitchen and ran down the road. At the first turning, he stopped and waved. Laura lingered on the steps, glad to see the sunshine on her head. The house was beginning to feel like a prison. Bert took the note from her fingers. What's this all about? I have no idea. But you said to let Harvey go. I know who sent the note and the book, Joel Todd. I guessed that. Bert sat down on the top step, but Harvey might know something else, such as what this note means. I doubt it. Joel must have made the little fellow promise to keep quiet. Harvey was just following orders, and I couldn't see you torturing him to make him break his word. I wasn't torturing him, Bert protested. You make me sick. And you... Out of the tail of her eye, Laura saw a little two-wheel carriage coming down the road from the left. In it was their neighbor, Mrs. Fitch, and it was too late to run into the house. The woman had already seen them. Bert thrust the note into his pants pocket while Laura sat as if turned to stone. To her amazement and relief, the lady did not get out of the carriage. She merely paused at the end of the path that led from the porch to the road and informed them briskly that she was on her way to town. I hear they arrested Richard Todd not an hour ago, she called out. Laura could see that she was delighted to have gossip to pass on. I'm going right over to comfort his poor wife. What did Mr. Todd do? Asked Bert. I hear he had one of those fugitive slaves hid in his house. Mrs. Fitch pulled her shawl over more firmly about her narrow shoulders. People who take the law into their own hands are bound to get into trouble. Did they catch the slave? Bert asked. No, I hear he got away. She shuddered. I only hope I don't meet up with him. With this remark, she gave the reins a slap and continued west on the road to Lewiston. As soon as Mrs. Fitch was out of sight, Laura and Bert went inside and shut the door. So that's why Joel can't come tonight, Laura exclaimed. He said they had a slave hidden in his house. Imagine Mr. Todd being in jail. Mrs. Fitch was right, she thought. People who helped the slaves were just asking for trouble. I don't see why Joel couldn't come anyway, mused Bert. He's not in jail. Laura was positive Joel was not coming. She reminded Bert. Harvey said very clearly, the boy who sent this said he can't come see you tonight. You heard him. I know, Bert sighed. Maybe I better go talk to Joel. And leave me here? What if the slave catchers come back? I'd be scared to death. She remembered too clearly Walt's rudeness. I wish Prince were still alive. Bert frowned. So do I. But you'll be safe enough. Leave Martin in the secret room and no one will find him. If you go, I'm going too. Someone ought to watch the house, he protested. We can lock the doors. Bert gave in. Oh, all right, come with me if you're so scared. While I hitch up Sally, go tell Martin we're leaving. Laura clapped her hand to her mouth. What'll Mrs. Fitch think? She'll be at the Todds when we get there. Bert grinned. We'll tell her we've come to comfort poor Joel. A message in code. The ridge road to Lewiston was busy. At the end of their lane, Bert and Laura had to wait for a wagon load of logs to rumble past. Then, finally on their way, Sally trotted past the team of oxen that pulled the timber, only to be stopped by 4 hogs, ambling across the road in front of them. Sally fidgeted, for she hated to stop for anything or anybody. The day was bright and crisp. There had been no rain for a week, and dust fanned out from the horses' hooves with every step. When the stagecoach from Rochester dashed by it, it left Bert and Laura choking and half-blinded. Laura sat up straight on the carriage seat beside Bert. Every time they approached another carriage or person on foot, she glanced fearfully from beneath her bonnet, afraid of meeting the men who had searched the house that morning. They might stop the carriage and ask more questions. Bert had the same idea, for he warned, Remember, we're going to town to shop. What are we going to buy? Molasses, said Laura promptly, and material for a new dress, blue silk. As they rode down Center Street past the village green, Laura saw several men lounging on benches. Sure that they were slave catchers, she kept her face averted. There's Mrs. Fitch, exclaimed Bert. Wonder why she's going back so soon. Laura looked up in time to see their neighbor's carriage flash past headed toward home. Mrs. Fitch, her hands busy with the reins, gave them a brief nod as she went by. Bert chuckled. Maybe Mrs. Todd didn't want to be comforted. I guess she knows what a gossip Mrs. Fitch is. At Fish Street, they turned left for a short distance and then turned right onto Cayuga. Laura recognized the Todds' pleasant, rambling house. How many times she had gone there to play! Her own mother had been a close friend of Mrs. Todd, so Laura had gone with her to visit from the time she was a baby. "We have a welcoming committee," muttered Bert. Seated on the carriage block in front of the house was Walt. Already he had noticed Laura. "Don't stop," whispered Laura urgently. "I won't," Bert replied out the side of his mouth. But Walt would not be ignored. As they drove by, he leaped to his feet and made a low bow. "Greetings, Miss High and Mighty," he shouted. Against her will, Laura looked at him and saw a glint of malice in his dark eyes. He was determined to get even for her for this morning. She told herself she didn't care, but she knew it had been unwise to make him her enemy. At a steady pace they rounded the next corner, and Bert looked back. He had a clear view, for no other house stood in the way. "There's Joel at the window," he said. As Laura turned, Joel waved, but it was not exactly a wave. He was motioning them away. It was perfectly clear that he didn't want them to stop. "Looks as if Joel's a prisoner in his own house," Bert commented. "Can they do that?" asked Laura. "They can watch the house, and if he puts a foot outside, they can follow him every place he goes. He doesn't want us to stop because the slave hunters will be suspicious of everyone who talks to him. They already suspect us. But if we stopped, they'd be for sure." Bert pulled gently on the reins, for Center Street lay just ahead. "What'll we do now?" "We'll stop. We'll shop," Laura decided. "Stop at the store." When they had purchased molasses, Bert said, Now shall we buy your blue silk?" "That was pretend," Laura answered. "I haven't enough money to buy a length of calico, let alone silk." Bert climbed into the carriage and pulled Joel's note from his pocket. "I have a feeling this note is trying to tell us something." He reread the few words, mumbling them to himself. "Maybe it's a code message." "It's nothing of the kind," said Laura. "He's making fun of me. Sending me Uncle Tom's Cabin. He knows what I think of that book." How can you know what you think of it? You never read it." "I don't need to read it. I've heard enough about it." Bert said, "I never thought you'd let other people make up your mind for you. You ought to read it yourself and see what you think." He picked up the reins. "Well, might as go home. We can't visit Joel, that's for sure." "Wait." Laura put her hand on his sleeve. "Is there anybody else you know who helps fugitives? Anybody who might come after Martin? We have to get him out of the house tonight." "That's right," Bert agreed. "Poor fellow. He'd be so disappointed if we didn't get him to the river by midnight." "Poor Martin indeed. It'll be poor us if Uncle Daniel sees Martin when he comes tomorrow." A stranger sauntered past the carriage and looked curiously at the two occupants. "Drive on now," urged Laura. "People will wonder what we're talking about." Sally moved briskly into the stream of wagons and carriages going down Center Street toward the river. Bert nodded toward a small shop on their left. "I hear Mr. Tryon is a station master on the Underground. He has a tailor shop over there." "Then stop for pity's sake and ask him to come for Martin." "I might be wrong," Bert said cautiously. "It's a funny thing you don't even know the other Underground Railroad people in your own town." "It's safer not to know too many. I just know the Todds for sure. And I also the name of a fellow in Lockport who sends fugitives here, Mr. Lyman Spaulding." He pulled to the side of the street. "We'll go talk to Mr. Tryon, and I can say we have a friend visiting us who wants to catch a boat, and ask him if he can fix his jacket in a hurry. If he's one of us, he'll know what I mean." Laura crossed the wide street beside Bert, holding her skirts clear of the dust. A man sat in the window of the tailor shop, cutting a piece of gray material on a table. Sitting behind him in a straight chair was a dark, bearded man smoking a cigar. Bert would have opened the door, but Laura tugged at his sleeve and walked on. "What's the matter?" asked Bert. "You wanted to go in there." "Something's wrong," she said quietly. "That man, the one with the beard, doesn't look as if he belongs in there." Bert was impatient. "Maybe he's waiting for his pants to be mended." "I doubt it. Mr. Tryon is just starting on a new suit." Bert said admiringly, "You have your eyes open, don't you? You'd make a first-class agent in the Underground." "Don't count on that," Laura replied. "I'm not in this because I want to be." When they were back in the carriage, Bert said thoughtfully, "Tryon. The tailor's name is Josiah Tryon." "So?" He again produced the note. "Listen. Though some may fail, those who try on and on will succeed. Notice that? Try on sounds like Tryon. Do you suppose Joel was telling us to go to Mr. Tryon?" Laura sighed. "I never knew you had so much imagination. No, I still say that note was just to tease me." They were nearing the end of Center Street, where the road sloped to the wharf and the American Hotel. Bert turned to the right onto 4th Street. "I'm going to drive along the river," he said. "I have an idea, and I want to think." Laura was in no hurry to return home. Riding behind Sally was far pleasanter than sitting at home, jumping at every sound and waiting for the long day to end. At the river road, they turned north, keeping the Niagara on their left. Every now and then Laura could see the blue glint of water through the trees. Though wider than at the foot of the falls, 7 miles to the south, the river still ran swiftly between lofty banks on its way to Lake Ontario. Laura had a sudden inspiration. "Do you think you could get Martin across the suspension bridge?" "With the slave catchers watching every person who goes across?" Bert jeered. Now they were outside the village of Lewiston, and the houses were far apart. There was little traffic. On their left, while back from the road and overlooking the river, Laura noticed a huge stone house topped by a tower. "My, who owns that?" she asked. "It's new. That's new, isn't it?" Bert glanced at the imposing house with its many chimneys. Judge Horatio Stowe built it not long ago. He was a successful lawyer in Buffalo, got a start here in town at Mr. Cook's law office, so when he made enough money, he decided to come back to live here to live. Pa says the judge likes it here. Looking across Judge Stowe's well-cleared lawns, Laura could see the river far below, and beyond that, steep cliffs of the Canadian shore ablaze with autumn foliage. Soon as they passed Judge Stowe's property, Bert slowed Sally to a walk and kept his eyes to the left. Laura guessed that he was watching for something, but she couldn't imagine what, for a dense woodland came down to the edge of the road, blotting out the view of the river and Canada. Tall pines stood elbow to elbow with red and gold maples and russet oaks, and the undergrowth was so dense she could see only a few feet into the wilderness. When a grass-choked lane came into view, Bert sat up alertly. Laura wondered at his sudden interest. "Where does that lead?" she asked. "There's a big house here on the river bank, and it's been empty for years." He reined in the horse. "Mr. Amos Tryon, that's Josiah's brother, built it. He never lived in it." He looked up and down the road as if he were thinking of turning around, but just then a wagon loaded with barrels of apples approached from the north, so Bert again set Sally into motion. Laura looked back at the overgrown drive. Memory teased at the edge of her mind, a memory of something that happened so long ago that it seemed to have been in another life. "I think I know the house," she said slowly. "That's the house with the cellars." "That's it. I was in it once, with Joel and Cousin Tessie. Joel dared us to go in there with him." Laura was beginning to recall a certain morning when she had been 7 or 8. She and Cousin Tessie, who lived on the river road not far from where they were now, had been playing at Joel's house, and he dared them to visit the haunted house on the river. "We went in through a broken window," she told Bert. "The rooms were all cobwebby. Joel took us down cellar, but Tessie got scared. I was scared too," she admitted, "but I pretended I wasn't. Joel said there were 4 cellars, one under the other, all the way down to the river. And you know how high the river bank is here. He wanted to explore all the cellars, but Tessie wouldn't go, so we gave up and went home. Joel and I got spanked for going off without telling anyone, but Tessie didn't get punished. She was visiting me that day and got away without spanking because she was company. Joel and I didn't think that was fair." The wagon load of apples was almost out of sight behind them on its way to Lewiston. "Do you know what people call that house?" Bert asked. Laura shook her head. "Tryon's Folly." Bert chuckled. "After Amos Tryon spent all that money on the house, his wife wouldn't live in it. People say that's the only mistake he ever made in a money way." Laura suddenly had an idea, and there was something in Joel's note about folly, she said. "Let me see it." She held out her hand. "After all, it is my letter." Bert handed it to her, and she read it aloud. "Though some may fail, those who try on and on will succeed. Sometimes folly leads to freedom, and the rabbit escapes from the trap." "That's it, Bert," she exclaimed with a quickening of interest. "Sometimes folly leads to freedom. It might mean that Tryon's Folly leads to freedom for the runaways. Maybe the slaves hide in the cellars until a boat can pick them up and take them across to Canada." "Eureka, sis, I think you're right," Bert beamed at her. Laura read the last line. "I suppose the rabbit is Martin." Now the wagon of apples was out of sight. Again Bert reined in. "What are you doing?" asked Laura, suddenly alarmed. "I'm going back and visit Tryon's Folly," he said. "No, you're not." She snatched the reins from his hands and set Sally again on the road north. "I am," he said, though he made no effort to reclaim the reins. "If that old house is the last stop on the Underground Railroad, I've got to go look at it." "Bert Eastman, are you thinking of taking Martin there tonight?" "Yes, I'm sure you're right. That's where Pa and the Todds take the runaway slaves." Laura felt angry and helpless. "I won't let you." She urged Sally to a trot. "It's too dangerous. They'll catch you, and then Pa will be arrested, and he'll have to pay a big fine." "They won't catch me." He put his hands on the reins in front of hers and pulled Sally to a halt. "I'll get out," Laura threatened. "Get out, then." Laura glared at him. "I'll go to the sheriff." Bert gazed at her scornfully. "And how would that help, Pa?" A clattering sounded on the road behind them. Laura looked over her shoulder and saw a man riding a large piebald horse coming after them full tilt. Bert sighed and moved Sally ahead. Quickly the horse came abreast of their carriage, and a moment later the rider swerved directly in front of them and halted. Sally was so frightened she reared up on her hind legs. As the rider leaped down from his horse, Laura recognized the insolent young slave catcher named Walt. Oh my, this is just getting more and more interesting. If you've already read it with me, then you already know what's coming up. But if you don't, it's getting very suspenseful. And hopefully they'll be able to figure out what they're going to do with Martin. So I hope you, again, join me for the next 2 chapters tomorrow. Okay.